we can begin with some questions. I'm sure you have many, many questions today.
A question in relation to forgiveness. If you could talk a little bit about forgiveness. Should we seek forgiveness as a means of purifying the mind? And also, should we forgive others? Or do we ask God to forgive others? Or is it just egotism to feel that we've been harmed by others? And then also, in relation to purity of mind, can we measure progress? Is there any measure of progress towards? So it's kind of three questions in one, if that's okay.
There's a kind of a saying that I've heard. I'm not sure if I've heard it or I've just adopted it myself. It is easy to forgive. It's not so easy to forget. And very often that's the complaint. Oh, Swami, you're one of these people. Yes, all very well. Talking about forgiveness, but can we forget? It's more difficult. And if you can't forget, you haven't forgiven. So with any question and answer session arranged around Vedanta, we have to take a number of different positions. Vedanta, just to remind you, has a whole range in Upanishads, a kind of toolbox that can be broadly categorized in three different areas. The question that you're asking about forgiveness is essentially a dualistic question. It assumes that we are in a place and there's somebody opposed to us. So the normal diagram I would give, I think you can see it from there. We put ourselves in a position, we make a world like that. We divide it into two areas, myself and other things. And then you see, if that's our view, and we put ourselves here, I, then all these things on the side, people, place, and events become a combat zone or a mutual admiration society zone, whichever you choose. So Vedanta encourages us not to do that. And in the beginning, when we set this up in spiritual life, we assume that God is some entity that is related to our view of the world. If we view this world as a creation, then God is the creator. If we view this world as a protected zone or area, we view God as a protector. If we view this world as some kind of artistic, creative play, then God becomes the cosmic dancer or the supreme player, and all this is to do with waves. Which position would we want to take? So our view of the world is important. And the Vedanta philosophy, in a practical way, takes us step by step to a reality, but asks this question. And the question is a beautiful question. It's not so much a question as a statement of intent. So there is a question about life that is contained in the Taittiriya Upanishad. And Dhammawacha yato va imani bhutani jayante yana jatan dani jivanti yat prayantya abhisambhishanti tad vijnana swasva tad pramati. The question is that truly that from which these beings are born, that by which they live, and that into which they go when departed, when they enter. We should seek to know that. That is the supreme entity, that is the sum totality, and the sum totality, we use the word Brahman. So when a person asks a question, what is Brahman, or teach me Brahman, teach me that supreme principle, that absolute, that kind of totality, we don't expect a fragmented answer. But we think in fragmented ways. So the scriptures, whatever scripture it is, takes us from a very fundamental area, a step-by-step process, to an ultimate unity. And that's okay in principle, but each step has to be accompanied by some practice. It has to be experiential at the end of the day. So if we start where we are, we can broadly put ourselves in the sphere and say, I'm here. And then we look around and say, where is God? And is there something outside here that can rescue me from this section here? Not only this section here, but maladies here. Here is a body. I know it looks very slim and must have been fasting during Lent. But you see, there's essentially a body that we primarily associate with ourselves. And that's one of the fundamental errors in our view of the world. So how do we get out of that? It's all very well to say that we are unbounded, we are full and free. We sit in an area not in here. But how is it we don't feel it? How is it that we feel bounded and restricted, enslaved, imprisoned? The wonderful book we were reading sections of the other day called The Imprisoned Splendor. And that is a beautiful book written by a scientist. He passed away in the 1980s. Still, he was broad-minded enough to investigate from a scientific point of view anything that was not deemed to be within the scope of normality, naturalism. And since his time, there have been a lot of scientific discoveries which seem to be outside the range of normality. Even before that, even 100 years old, we find in a factual way, subject to experimentation, we recognize they're there. What I'm saying is that if I situate myself here and put this relationship here, the circle that I've drawn will describe our limitations and our horizons. When we look out to sea, we see there's a horizon. And when we look at in any direction, you can see there's only a limitation. Sometimes in the room I'm sitting, I can only see walls and so on and so forth, but there's a door at the end of it. Outside of the door, there's a vast garden and so on and so forth, but that has its limitation. And when we say we want to know something, we're automatically presenting a horizon, a boundary, a border that suggests something more is to be known. So when we start investigating things, we have to feel what is the border, and then beyond that, what should we know more of? Now, when we talk about forgiveness, the first thing we're assuming is I'm standing here and somebody to be forgiven is standing somewhere else, and we are foreigners. We're not even the same species. And so the idea and the question of forgiveness is one which is psychological. It's a psychological question requiring a psycho-spiritual response. What do I mean by psycho-spiritual? It means I have to learn to deal with the situation from this area, from the mind, and I also have to be able, according to Vedanta, to have the capacity to stand here, outside the circle. And Vedanta is a toolbox that gives me and allows me all the tools to do that. So 3 approaches are there, broadly described as Vedanta. One is this dualism. The question asked is a dualistic question. Now we are in the Easter period, it's Easter Day, but what has led up to this is somehow connected with your question of forgiveness. Because the theological concept of Christ taking a life journey and the description of his teaching and his talking about this gospel, this good news. The good news is essentially good news about a kingdom of heaven, a kingdom of God. The normal messianic way of viewing things is that a Messiah or an anointed one is either a great religious leader, some kind of priest, anointed for ritualistic temple duties, or is a king like King David. And sometimes the idea is the emergence of the two. But if we take it, as Christians take it, then Jesus was not a political figure. Jesus was a spiritual entity, a spiritual being. And not only a spiritual being, but according to the Christian theology, an incarnation of God. If we take it like that, not in any exclusive way, because, of course, the Vedanta will acknowledge that the concept of avatara is entrenched in Hindu mythology, but also entrenched for all time in Srimad Bhagavad Gita, in that one statement that says that I am born. How? From age to age. And that means when Krishna said I, when Jesus said I, they were talking, or even when Buddha said I, they were talking of an area that can be described as cosmic consciousness or cosmic mind. What is called in the Upanishads, Hiranyagarbha. There's one Upanishad very dedicated to that subject. It's the Mahanarayana Upanishad, and very centered around this concept of this logos, this word, this cosmic mind, from which everything comes, and what we call a personal God. So if we are praying to that cosmic mind or personal God, please can you forgive me and can you forgive others, is perfectly reasonable, since cosmic mind contains the creative capacity to do anything. After all, the whole world has come from it. But if we ask, should we forgive? Well, let's put it in a psychological way. If it is true that we are asking this important question and assuming that there is a cause for our existence, and that we come from it, and that we live life and we go back to it. By the way, this is put on what is called in Christianity a Paschal Candle. Paschal Candle, certain symbols are endorsed on it. On last night it would have happened. For the Christians, it's Holy Saturday. But you see, that light represents something deeply spiritual. A big candle like this, and in it a cross is marked. And in one section, at the top and the bottom, is called Alpha and Omega. And Alpha and Omega, that expression comes from the canonical text called Revelations. I am the beginning and I am the end. What a wonderful synchronicity between that and that statement that is asked, from which, what is that from which these beings are born? That is the Alpha, the beginning. And when born, they live. In that they live. And that into which, when departing, they enter Omega, the last thing. I am the Alpha and the Omega is the statement. I'm the beginning, but I'm also the middle and I'm the end. I'm the whole of the thing. So what a wonderful match this is, this statement that is put on a candle at the Easter period. It is an indication when you light that candle of exactly this cosmic mind that enables everything to be born, sustains everything while living, and it goes back to its origin. I was used to telling children, life is a journey. We are the traveler. We come from God and we go to God. But there's a we in it. And that means that anybody who is a human entity, and Vedanta will say not just human, the whole of existence. Because when we say, what is that from which we are including ourselves in the whole of existence. Where do we come from? Where are we going? It's the same thing, because there's no distinction between the beginning and the end, or even the middle. It is only our conceptual ideas about these things. If we see that unity of existence and that we're all traveling in the same direction, and that we're all making divergences and deviances. In other words, none of us are unflawed, none of us are perfect. If we were, we wouldn't be here trying to get it. And so I think it's a very good thing to forgive people. That requires an understanding. It requires seeing that entity from which we all come, by which we're all sustained, and where we're all going to. Only one entity. So simply from a human level, which is this level, a human psychological, emotional level, then I think we can forgive people. But what's in the way? Emotion is in the way. Now, emotion is so strong that in a contest between intellect and feeling, feeling will always win. Every salesperson knows that if they want to sell something, they have to sell it on the emotional level, emotional basis. It takes some ordinary chemical, some cream, suitable for putting on the skin, not burning the skin or anything, not containing sulfuric acid or anything like that. And they will tell you how you can take away, many, many years of your aging from it. You'll look like a film star. All of these things will be come to you, and there has a visual component to it. So there's a matching feeling. How will you feel if you're like that? And how will other people view you physically, and so on and so forth? So all the emotions are coming, and you feel much happier once you've taken the cream. Whether it works or not, that's a different thing. So every salesperson knows that you have to appeal to how does it feel, the feeling of it. You want to sell a car, you don't sell a car, you sell a holiday enabled by the car. So in the same way, we are swayed by emotions. And therefore we have to rally the emotions round. Initially, what will happen, still on a dualistic basis, we then put God inside the picture. So we register God inside here, and we register God outside there. And now we refer to many passages. One we can take from the issue of Upanishad. You sees the self, that is the fundamental divine entity in all beings, and all beings in the self can never hate anybody. Hate will go from it because we are seeing the same entity here. And so when Jesus is teaching the kingdom of heaven, he's saying, you won't find it here or there. For a truth I tell you, the kingdom of heaven is within you. There are other translations to say it's in your midst, but these are just semantics, basically. It is a within, it's an immanent thing. It is inside. The whole of the issue of Upanishad is telling us of this immanent side, and there's a transcendent side. So that we now have to adjust our thinking. Whoever we think has offended us, and we want, we think we should forgive them, and we should forget also, we have to revalue our view. We have to reposition. And we do this by breaking the component parts down. We do it first here. Our own body. This body is not just a single unit. This body is like several Russian dolls, one fitted into another. It can be viewed like that. And this has been mentioned in the Untitled Upanishad, the concept of kosha, that is sheaths, outer sheath made from food, means made from matter. We were studying a passage like that yesterday or the other day, which stated, again referring to Untitled Upanishad, that we start off from that. The question is there. The question is from Bhrigu. It's in a section called Bhriguvali. of the Taittiriya Upanishad. Teach me Brahman. And another way of asking is, teach me that from which everything is born, by which everything is sustained, and into which everything returns. So from the start, it's assumed there's something like that. We can dispense with any linear progression. We start here and finish there. So your question about how will we measure it, that's gone. How will you measure a totality? You can only measure parts of it. But if you're led to understand a totality in any sense, then the question doesn't arise about progression. It's only uncovering. We don't say that we are achieving or attaining anything in spiritual life. We are really realizing something already there. We may not know it, we may not see it, but as we go deeper and deeper into the essence of our own being, it becomes steadily, progressively revealed. But we can start off from matter. Matter, also called food. And if we see it as a level or a layer or a sheath in ourselves, and knowing that the law of nature is constant, we have to see it all throughout the universe. So modern science is investigating matter, because matter and food, these are synonymous terms. The characteristic of matter is it is consumed and it consumes. It transforms itself into one thing, and that one thing superimposes itself on another, and so it goes on, and life becomes all rhythmic and cooperative as a result. Supposing we are sitting in the suburbs of a Milky Way as we are, and we are seeing that we're on a collision course and vice versa with our nearest galaxy, Andromeda. Well, these two will merge, so one gets swallowed up in the other. But then ultimately, that may break away again, and something else forms. It's a dynamic universe that we're living in. So food is both the eater and the eaten. The human body is like that, and it's a dynamic thing that looks like a static thing until some years later we look in the mirror and say, oh, something happened. Somehow wrinkles are there, somehow gray hairs are there. Something happened in between, but we didn't notice the step-by-step gradual change. So seeing God, now I'm using, instead of saying self, I'm saying God. Seeing God in the other person, but you see, where's the emotion in it? We have to feel that presence. We have to be convinced of that presence firstly, and then we have to understand. Speech cannot occur, whether it is in our favor or against us, whether it's an insult or otherwise. Speech only comes because of it. And we can shift our view, if we're talking the Upanishads, shift our view to the Kena Upanishad. I'm the eye of the eye, I'm the ear of the ear, and so on. There's that entity which expresses itself. And if we have a keen observation, we can see the reason why somebody speaks is because speech is enabled from within, and there's an entity there that does it. That's a sustaining thing. It came from it. It's keeping it going. It's by which we live and into which it returns. Like a flow of water, diverted temporarily and going back, a fluid motion. You can see life is more of a fluid. We don't see it in that way. We see it as individual parts and segments. Let's learn to see it as a fluid thing and see that there's a unity of existence. Jesus was famous for saying, why before you take the splinter out from somebody else's eye, take the beam out from your own. So this is what we have to attend to and make sure that that is in solid condition. And sometimes then people ask the question, should we forgive ourselves? Well, the answer is yes, on the basis that we are not perfect, and yet the next moment we can adjust it. driving a car, it has a tendency to go off to the left. We don't leave it till the end of the year and make an assessment. How did we do? Or the end of our life. We immediately correct it. We get into the habit of making the correction. In making the correction and getting used to that position, no forgiveness is necessary. It's only just making corrections until it becomes there's a habitual thing going on. And part of that habitual nature is anything which is pure, anything which is of a sattvic characteristic. So is forgiveness of a sattvic characteristic? Well, of course, what's the alternative? Seeing the self in all beings, and all beings in self, I can never hate anybody, says the issue Purnananda. I can never, in other words, have any negative position. That being the case, nothing to forgive, actually, from that point of view. And then you see, that's from this dualistic level. Can I raise it up to a different level? Yes. So I can start out with that understanding of matter and food, but behind that is energy. That's the next sheet. Energy is something that is more amorphous. I can't really pinpoint it down, but I can see its effects. And we call this prana, what modern science calls energy. But if you ask any scientist to define what is energy, they can't tell you. They can only categorize it, different types of energy. For example, if you go on a roller coaster, then the energy that brings you down is gravity, and the energy that takes you up is kinetic energy. And both have to be equal to make things go. When you have a down, then there's immediately an up, but it keeps you going. The momentum keeps you going. That kind of thing. And then the rails on which this roller coaster is running, there's another kind of energy called, which is generated from friction. So heat is there. Now these ancient people understood this very well. So matter is there, characterized by the word food. Energy is there. Even if we take it literally as food, physical food that we eat, that food generates energy. And it is all an equation. What you take in, its energy capacity, called calorific value, has to be spent. If it's not spent, it resides in you. And then its energy goes into what we call tamas. It goes into an inertial state that we often call overweight, fat deposits. So we have to keep things in a dynamic condition. And with each section, with each sheath, we find a causal aspect. What is the cause of this body moving? That cause is this section that is called energy. And is there something behind energy? What makes that move? Yes, mind. Mind is a faculty, and we can see it as a field, and every field has a number of different activities, particular things coming and going, and we can observe it, how we feel about something or not. And the forgiveness area is in that area. It's the emotional area. And then the intellect can reason it out. Is there a basis for me to forgive somebody? Is there a rational basis? And then can I evoke some feelings from it? And so there's an intellect, but behind the intellect is something that is intuition, and it is characterized as bliss. Now, for meditation purposes, we can take that bliss and we can describe it as the cave of the heart. So you want to put it in diagrammatic form, something like that, for meditation purposes. And equally for meditation purposes, this divine self, this king or heaven within, is described as of the size of a thumb. It's not that it's limited in any way, but we can conceive of it that way because we're still in the dualistic area. So we start off simply with certain basic concepts. But then to practically experience that, we have to go from the outside progressively to the inside. So part of the forgiveness aspect is, just to summarize, seeing this entity that has put a grievance against us, that we feel has a grievance against us, that has in some way attacked us, or in some way upset us, in some way done an injustice to us, is how we feel, maybe. It may not necessarily be as direct or as honest as that. It might just be the way we are taking it. It's not necessarily factually. You know, one of the 5 waves that the Sankhya's proposed, carried over to Patanjali Yoga Sutras. 5 types of waves are there in the mind. And one is verbal delusion. Somebody says something, it immediately creates a reaction or overreaction in us, and we get the whole thing wrong. I always remember in Zimbabwe, a lawyer friend of mine, an insurance fellow, and he had an appointment with a man and his wife, and the man arrived, but not the wife. And the man was late, and the wife was nowhere to be seen. And so the person behind the desk said, "You're late." And I said, "Yes, sorry for that. And your wife is late." He says, "And where is your wife?" And he says, "She's late." And the conversation persisted, but there were cultural differences. And it turned out that the man who said, "My wife is late," meant she was deceased. So we can easily misunderstand people completely and totally because of various cultural differences, linguistic differences, and so on. We can easily get the wrong end of the stick, in which case it's not the other person that requires forgiving. It's our mistake. So we have to evaluate this a little properly. In the context of theology, the idea that there should be forgiveness, that also comes up. And then in the season that we are living, this Easter season and everything leading up to it, it is pre-established, if you like, by a period of Lent, a period where we assess, honestly, our pros and cons. And if we want to do this in a healthy way, we should do it in a clinical way, not in an emotionally guilty way. And I think that's one of the dangers of doing this, and the dangers of certain types of theology. So assessing where we are, and then where should we be going, and making the adjustment. In that sense, yes. But you see, this whole idea of Christ being crucified on the cross and the theology that goes with it has deep Jewish implications. What we call Easter, or even yesterday, was the Pascha, the Passover. It was commemorating even the concept of us being in slavery through the story of the Exodus, from an enslaved people to a land of bliss, what was called, in fact, milk and honey. And the Paschal Candle that Christians use, and light, symbolizing a light connecting with the Exodus story to say it is God as light leading these people, chosen people, because they have chosen freedom, toward this land of bliss. And the last kosha, which is there, is bliss, of course, leading to that land of bliss, where this entity that we call philosophically Atman, that religion calls the kingdom of heaven within, or any other similar or equivalent term. We have to lead ourselves in, and everybody's on that journey. Now, what if we don't forgive ourselves, if we don't forgive everybody else, and so on and so forth? Then will it create a disturbance in our mind? It will. And psychologically, what is the area that is the most difficult for us? Why cannot we see or experience our own freedom? is because of all these disturbances. And so the reason why we get stressed and the reason why animals do not get stressed is that we chew the cud of resentment and animals do not. They take their adrenaline, they use it, and they move on. We take our adrenaline and then we recall endlessly. This person did this in a monologue, a continuous monologue of resentment. And so we cannot forget because we're always introducing the term but, you see. Yes, somebody says they're a nice person, but you see what they did here, you see what they did there, that kind of thing. So rather than use the term forgiveness, why don't we use the term revaluation? Why don't we revalue the world and see it as God sees it? God saw the world, made the world, and saw that it was good. How is it that we see it as bad? And from age to age, these great incarnations come, and they all suffer. They suffer out of love of humanity. Ramakrishna suffered, Jesus suffered, Buddha suffered, Krishna suffered, they all suffered. Because their generosity of spirit, their global view of things, nay, their universal view of things. Not even that, their view of the oneness of all beings evoked this element of compassion. And the element of compassion is man at their most altruistic. So we try to elevate ourselves and the mind to the most altruistic and highest level that we possibly can, where we see this oneness, this unity of existence. Now, we don't necessarily have to stand here and say, okay, so now I have revalued this. Because you see, how do you revalue it? You can revalue it as that entity is immanent in here and immanent in all these people, places, and events. Practicing the presence of God in everything. And doing that with some creative imagination. On the basis that what is stopping our higher thought and our forgiving nature is emotion. And so when we raise up, not just seeing this presence and seeing God in everyone, but raising up a love that goes with it. Because if we see this disguised element that we call a God, a personal God, then we'll be inclined to love that. And if we love God, then we love that. What is the highest teaching? Jesus is asked. He said, well, what do your scriptures say? In Deuteronomy, it's there. And that overrides any other legalistic commandment, any other guideline to moral and ethical life. Everything comes from it. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your strength, with your whole being. And every religion that holds spiritual devotion dear, and most religions do, they will say the same thing. Fix your mind on me, says Krishna. See? That's it. Take all your energy, take all your psychological, emotional, physical energy and direct it in this way, and do it in a delightful way. Do it in an enlightening way. Do it in a joyful way. And then we have to revalue how do we view nature and life. Now, one way of revaluing it is to take seriously the question, why do we exist at all? From a philosophical basis, we have to bridge a gap between being and becoming. And every religion and every thinking person will have to do that. Supposing there's a transcendent entity that we call the absolute, and then there is a time-bound series of things, events, that we call generally the world, and we say that's only one entity. How do we get from that pristine condition, if you will, that pristine state, to a fragmented condition called you and me and this and that? And so the only real explanation is what we call Lila Maya, that this is a play of waves. This is a drama which is not always there. And here philosophy suggests a wonderful solution to it. It says these play of waves only occur in only one or two states of our consciousness. And this only describes one state called a waking state. But another state is there, a dream state, and that's also a play of waves, valued from here as something ephemeral. But from the dream state, no evaluation takes place like that. It's taken as reality, but even that goes away. And with all the layers peeled off, all the koshas peeled off, that is food, energy, and then mind in the dream state, mind, and then intellect, we are left with bliss. That bliss we call dreamless sleep, where God simply stands there. Valued like that, we're sitting on God's lap. Valued from here, we had a blank. But it was peaceful, it was blissful, because there were no two there. So fortunately, we have this idea, the play of waves, and if that's the case, then we should lighten up a little bit, and we should consider not just these individual elements, a forgiver and a forgiven, but a play of waves. Simply a play of waves. And these can be categorized fivefold. And thus we call it tanmatras. And I keep repeating from the Ashtavakra Samhita that if you understand that all these gross elements are simply manifestations of these subtle elements, you have got your freedom immediately. Because immediately you realize that this should be, and it can be enjoyed. And so we have two sides of these coins brought out in Ramakrishna's language, or explanation as Nitya, the eternal on the one side, and Lila on the other. And we cannot separate them. The whole of life then becomes the kingdom, not just within, but as. Or we can at best say through, so that we can see that all the limbs and so on, and the voice and the attitudes that a so-called individual was performing seemingly against us, with us as a victim, we can now revalue as a set of waves. We have now gone from dualism to a qualified non-dualism and seeing the play of life. And then we can go even further. We can choose to stand here. So many times I've drawn this in various ways, variations. We can choose to stand here. And we can see not only this, but we can see the other dramas being performed. And we can do it by a fourth sphere, which we can call meditation. That is taking us progressively inward. For example, through this layer of food, through this layer of energy, through this layer of mind, through this layer of intellect, layer of bliss, and there I just stand as pure being, then the question doesn't arise. How does being transfer itself to becoming? The becoming is not always there. And this is a witness, a seer. But when this is gone, there's nothing to see. We have to change the language, no longer a seer. It's pure being. That is Brahman. Now, in the answer to the question, can you teach me Brahman and qualifying it? Because that Brahman, that absolute, I understand as the origin, as the Alpha and the Omega, where things are born, how things are sustained, and where they go back to. That's what I want to know. That's a question that is asked. It is asked in this Bhrigu Vali, and progressively the teacher will take the student through these various levels and layers. First through food, and then through energy. And that is where science has stopped. Science stopped with food and energy. That is matter and energy, and resolved everything back to energy. The only thing that exists is energy. Is that the only thing that exists? And so these mystics have gone one step further. not just experientially, but logically. Where do these waves come from? And can we say waves? Yes, we can see that there is a series of events that have an origin, that have a peak, and that have a demise. And when you see things like that, you can only suggest that things came and things went, just like waves come and go. Not like particles appearing and disappearing. With a wave-like behavior that we are observing. And then where would that come from? Where would a wave-like behavior come from? And if we say that what happens here must happen everywhere, law of nature constant, then we have to view the entire cosmos in the same way and say the cosmic mind. If you say my mind, it's an aberration, it's your mistake. It's only said out of ignorance. It's said out of a sense of individuality, individual identification with a body-mind complex, a psychophysical entity that inevitably has to put themselves opposed to others, or yield to others, or run away from others. These are the options. What all religions are suggesting is you replace it with love. And when you replace it with love, the question of forgiveness doesn't arise. Or automatically forgiveness will be there. But not only forgiveness, adoration will be there also. It's not just forgiveness. You see, in a court of law, for a minor misdemeanor, a person can get off with a light sentence, let's say a fine, and everything is gone, fine. Your record may still be there, but still it's a minor thing. Or you can, for a more serious crime, you can spend many years in jail or pay a much heavier fine. But after your sentence is completed, there should be forgiveness and it should be forgotten. But you see, there's no emotional thing going on there. It's all clinical. In order to really forgive, we have to insert emotion into it. We have to forgive from the heart, not just from the mind. And the basis of that would be to see that divinity within, to see that perfection within, to broaden our vision and understanding away from individuality to something that has a oneness, a totality. And the closer we get to the totality, the less we can hate or have any other adverse reaction toward anything else, because we understand there's a oneness there. So not only should we forgive, but we have no real option in spiritual life, but we have to forget also. Because if we haven't forgotten, we haven't forgiven. Now we have the theological understanding that Christ forgave all mankind's sins on the cross. It has its roots, of course, in the offering of a lamb as a kind of scapegoat. You take all collective sins that you have and you offer it, as it were, to God. Assuming that God is not vegetarian, you offer the lamb up to God, and then you're let off scot-free. Now it can be taken a deeper way, that you take your most precious possession and you offer out of love. And that love automatically dilutes and eventually erases completely any sin that you have. And so this kind of aspect is called sanchita karma. Prarabdha karma you have to live with, but the sanchita karma you can erase, and future karma you determine. So you put something in now, and any negative thought will unfortunately give you a negative result in a future second, minute, hour, or year, or lifetime. So it's simply from a common sense point of view only, just from that point of view, we not only have to forgive, but we have to forget, but additionally, we have to revalue. And when we revalue, we put in love and adoration, because we only see that same unity of existence. You know, when we do the Enneagram, one of the effects of the Enneagram, hopefully, would be to say that all of us are struggling to realize our freedom And that struggle will involve pain, will involve difficulty, will involve unequalness, it will involve friction. And we should welcome it as a learning thing. So one characteristic of all saints would be humility. And humility will be, it's all right, I accept. I don't take anything personally. In other words, the only thing that is offended is the egoistic sense, which says, I am this, and doesn't say, I am this. It's as simple as that. So, then I just conclude a little bit with that. So, because relating to Easter, and so we could say also that there are deeper inferences and lessons from the whole events of Eastertide leading up to today. And that is that the lesson is that we will go through much suffering, but we have the capacity to engender, to cultivate, and to make forbearance and tolerance and acceptance part of our second nature. And then when we surrender our whole ego, symbolized by the cross, we can say something like this. The cross can be like that. And then that's I, you see. And when we cross this I out, that can be the symbol of the cross. So when we surrender this precious ego, this material life, not literally, but from a mentally renouncing point of view, from a detaching point of view, from a more realistic, accepting point of view of our own real nature, the sunshine of our glory comes that theologically is registered as a resurrection, a new beginning, an illumination, a discovery. Not really discovery, is already there. Like clouds moved on and there the sun is. Or like the sun rising. And the sunrise is a symbol of this great Easter, this great resurrection that is coupled, of course, with spring. And spring is a symbol of a new life, a new beginning. And so, yes, we take all our biases, all our grudges, and let's do away with them from today. And say, when we do that, we clear the space, as it were, for the sun of knowledge to come through. Like a spring, a new beginning. You must have noticed in spring how new flowers have developed on trees, being born, as it were, all of a sudden, from almost nowhere, a drama of life happening like this. And so Sunday is the sun's day, and that is when this occurs. And from then on, of course, Sunday was the Christian celebration of this remarkable event. But a number of prerequisites have to be there. And the final prerequisite will be to please take away the egoistic tendencies and make the ego an open channel for God's grace and glory to spread everywhere. And this resurrection or realization is what we celebrate on Easter Sunday, the sun's day. You know, every day has a prime minister. Monday, the moon presides. Tuesday, Mars presides. Wednesday, Mercury presides. Thursday, Jupiter presides. Friday, Venus presides. Saturday, Saturn presides. And Sunday, the sun presides, and is seen to be auspicious. So when Christianity spread to the Greco-Roman world, seeing that there was sun worship, just as in India, Surya worship was there. One of the sectarian ways of looking at things that Shankaracharya understood and identified. That same thing was there. Sol Invictus was there, the all-conquering sun. And Constantine was said to be a worshipper of that. He saw God in that way. And of course, when we repeat the Gayatri mantra, we also see the sun in this way, or we see God in this way. So this is why Easter is a wonderful festival. Some non-Christians and even Christians think that Christmas is the great Christian celebration, but actually from a Christian point of view, it is Easter because it celebrates the spring of life, originally dedicated to Oistra, the Celtic goddess of spring, and many dates. I think, for example, the Eastern Orthodox Church will have a different day for this. But in any event, the purport of it is a spring. And, you know, as the urban dweller said to the country farmer, spring in the air. And the farmer said, no, why should I? So with that little joke, we can finish off there. I hope I answered your question to some extent anyway.
Yeah, many thanks, Swamiji. Many thanks. Yeah. The idea of revaluation, I think, is what I was missing, you know.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Okay, good. Shanti, Shanti, peace, peace, peace be on all.